Hey, what's up, guys? This is going to be the final part of Tucker Carlson's series. This is part five, and it's going to add a lot of context about the whole series and how the Iraq War started and the surveillance program of the NSA and the civil liberty violations from the Bush White House. So let us get right to it.
The 9/11 Commission failed to fulfill the single task it was charged with, explaining how 9/11 happened and why. Instead, it lied. But the 9/11 Commission did achieve another goal.
Bush is winning, baby!
It protected the Bush administration, which went on to win a resounding re-election victory in the 2004 elections. It also provided a basis to radically transform our country and our way of life in the United States. The final 70 pages of the 9/11 report detail a long list of recommended reforms. Those so-called reforms radically expanded the power of the very same agencies that failed to protect the United States from the terror attacks.
With my signature, this law will give intelligence and law enforcement officials important new tools to fight a present danger.
Some of those changes, like the Patriot Act, passed before the commission even issued its report.
We did not need new laws to allow wiretapping and surveillance because in all of the channels for the FBI, CIA, NSA, DIA, we had every bit of information we needed to stop the terrorists.
Kristen Breitweiser is a lawyer. She's also a 9/11 widow who has spent decades pushing for accountability for what happened on 9/11.
The attacks 100% should have been prevented, could have been prevented. The U.S. government had everything it needed to stop the attacks.
And yet, rather than blame the agencies for their obvious failures, Congress gave the deep state power to access your business records, including your library and bookstore records, with minimal to no judicial oversight, as if you did something wrong. Congress permitted roving wiretaps of multiple phones without specifying a specific target. Congress authorized unconstitutional searches of homes and businesses without any notification at all. Congress created something called national security letters, which enabled the FBI to get personal records without any court's approval, and also gave the FBI power to issue gag orders so you couldn't tell anyone they were doing this.
Yeah, so let me expand on this. In the days after the 9/11 attacks, the Bush White House, which was basically close with the CIA, didn't know anything about the NSA. And Bush had not known or never met the director of the NSA at the time, Michael Hayden. It wasn't until after the CIA recommended Hayden that he meet with Bush that Bush basically said that what do you need us to do to get intelligence to prevent future attacks to not happen? And the NSA says, well, we are bound by the laws of the Department of Justice and also privacy laws that are amended in the Constitution, from accessing data in an expedient manner. And this was a huge freaking deal because what happened was during, when this happened, right? When the attacks happened, it really, how can I say? It gave like unchecked authority to the Bush White House and expanded on his war powers. And also the intelligence services basically said, well, we don't have the necessary funding, nor also we're bound by laws. Bush, under his legal counsel, people like John Yoo and Alberto Gonzalez, Dick Cheney's personal lawyer, David Addington, would work around the Constitution with the help of NSA lawyers, White House counsel, to basically look for loopholes and outright just break the fucking law. So this was expanded under Obama even. Obama went a lot further than Bush, where he basically gave unchecked authority to the NSA to collect any privacy data from cell providers like Verizon and AT&T. And it wasn't until a whistleblower named Mark Klein saw a room in a AT&T substation where it was called 617 or 61A or something like that. And if you Google that, room six, I think it was room 61A. And they see a room that was made by the NSA, locked. He couldn't get in. What the fuck is this? And found out there were routers collecting data that was trafficked through AT&T routers, collecting all the emails, all the phone calls, all the text messages, right to the NSA. And it was dumped to a warehouse called a big mega station called the Utah Data Center, which is located in Pine Bluff, Utah. But I do want to play a video of congressional oversight on the NSA, and they're going to talk about who gave the State Department the authority to do all this, and it's David Addington on the stand. And you'll see right here, this is David Addington talking with Senator Conyers, John Conyers. All right, now listen to what he has to say here.
I think we understand the games that are being played. Okay, now let me turn to Attorney Addington about the ABC News reported that there was a so-called principals meeting in which Vice President Cheney sat around with other cabinet-level officials to approve specific interrogation techniques. True?
I don't know of any such meeting, Mr. Chairman. It doesn't mean one did or didn't occur. I certainly wasn't at one.
None.
I was not at a meeting with the description you've given.
Right. Do you feel that the unitary theory of the executive allows the president to do things over and above the stated law of the land?
The Constitution binds all of us, Congressman, the President, all of you as members of Congress, all of the federal judges. We all take an oath to support and defend it. I frankly don't know what you mean by unitary theory of government. I don't have...
Have you ever heard of that theory before?
I have. I've seen it in the newspapers all the time.
Do you support it?
I don't know what it is.
You don't know what it is?
And it's always described as something Addington's the great, advocator of. Now, let me tell you where I've used the word unitary. In quoting OLC opinions, in drafting signing statements. And you will find OLC opinions that refer to the unitary executive branch. And by that, they simply mean... I don't need you to interpret to me what other people have used. No.
You're telling me...
your question.
You're telling me you don't know what the unitary theory means.
I don't know what you mean by it, no, Mr.
You don't know what I mean by it.
Or anyone else.
Do you know what you mean by it?
I know exactly what I mean by it. And
so what do you mean?
Sentences.
Tell me.
The use of the word unitary by me has been in the context of unitary executive branch. And all that refers to is, I think it's the first sentence of Article 2 of the Constitution, which says all of the executive power is vested in a President of the United States. Correct. One President, all of the executive power, not some of it, not part of it, not the parts Congress doesn't want to exercise itself. That's all it refers to.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Right. And let me expand on that because it's important to the point about the NSA collecting data. Because unitary executive theory is a constitutional law that asserts that the President of the United States has sole control over the executive branch. That means all decisions are made. What Addington said, they knew what the fuck he was talking about. And this allows for Bush to dictate or subordinate actions, right? And remove officials at will without any explanation at all and without any congressional or judicial oversight or approval. Now, this is important because what Bush did with Dick Cheney and Michael Hayden was that they allowed Hayden to have unchecked authority over knocking down the walls in privacy rights and allow for him to collect data using White House legal counsel and NSA lawyers to circumvent privacy laws afforded to every single U.S. citizen in the United States. And so by doing this, the president overstepped everybody's authority using the unitary executive theory. And that's what that was about regarding the NSA. Because according to Bush and Hayden and David Addington was that They needed to do this to prevent the United States from being a victim of another terrorist attack. But in other words, it was bullshit. They just wanted your data without a warrant.
11 to stop the attacks. In 2007, the National Security
That's huge.
surveillance of your phone calls, your emails, and your internet activity.
Right.
On American citizens who've done nothing wrong. My name is John Kiriakou.
I've interviewed Kiriakou.
CIA counterterrorism officer, chief counterintelligence in Alex Terrorism Center on 9/11. Within hours of the attacks, in retrospect, the CIA changed from an intelligence service as recruiting spies to steal secrets and to analyze them so policymakers could make the best informed policy.
That is correct. And let me also say this, that the NSA and the CIA were working together in regards to a transition that NSA officials basically were trying to force during the Clinton administration, but couldn't. Now, let me explain to you. In December of 2000, right, the NSA warned about the incoming Bush administration that U.S. citizens are going to be monitored by accident, right? And the NSA completed a report for the incoming Bush administration, and it was entitled Transition 2000. You could Google that, and it tells the NSA about how they're planning to, improve on intelligence gathering, and more. By the way, more importantly, it told White House officials that in the process of improving its intelligence gathering, that U.S. citizens inadvertently will be targeted for surveillance. Though, according to a unnamed NSA official, the NSA analysts were supposed to delete the name of the citizen before being surveilled, but they didn't do that. Not during the Bush administration, not after 9/11. And this was, and we're going to get into it in a minute, because Bill Binney's program, Thin Thread, which is different than PRISM, basically was a program that hid the information, hid the name of the person. And if you need to know who the person was, you had to go through a warrant. But NSA said, no, we're not going to back Thin Thread. We're going to a project called Trailblazer because it has a lot more money. It didn't care about privacy laws, and it was a failed project anyway. And Thomas Drake, the former senior executive of the NSA, who came on my show, basically talked about that for a little bit. The law expressly prohibits the NSA from spying on U.S. citizens, along with the CIA, even U.S. corporations, or even fucking permanent residents, okay? However, with the permission of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, not Act Court, the FISC, right? The NSA can spy on foreigners or, diplomats inside the United States. Now, this is where it's a gray area, because, this is what the NSA is saying. We're going to spy on some, residents, but we don't want to. But an NSA official would actually go on record. And I have the article from the Boston Globe, and it was in October 2001. And the NSA official who went he didn't name himself because he wanted to remain hidden because he was still working at the NSA, said if in the course of surveillance, the NSA analysts learned that it involved a U.S. citizen or company, they are dumping that information right then and there. But that didn't happen, because when Bush took office in January 2001, the practice turned to radical change. They didn't dump the names. So in the same transition report, Transition 2000, the agency officials said that the NSA must become a powerful presence, permanent, on the commercial network, a goal they admit that would break legal and privacy issues, which leads back to the previous point I was making regarding the NSA illegal wiretap on Americans. And by the way, the room was 641A. Google that. Not many people know about that story. It was a huge story. One of my very first articles on Medium was about that. So yeah, that's what that was about. That's what the NSA was about during that time. But they got worse. And I don't know why nobody talks about it. James Bamford is the best regarding the NSA programs throughout the years. But yeah, Kiriakou, CIA, and we're going to talk about him in a minute.
To a paramilitary organization whose job it was to capture and or kill anybody who could pose a threat to the United States. I went to Pakistan as the chief of CIA counterterrorism operations in January of 2002, and I was given no specific orders. So on my very first day in Pakistan, I went to see the station chief, and I said, "What do you want me to do?" And he said, "I want you to come up with a plan to take down a terrorist safe house." I went back to my desk with a legal pad and thought to myself, all right, what would I do to take down a terrorist safe house? And I wrote at the top of the page 0200 because I would want it to be dark. And then I thought, well, 9/11 is still an open criminal investigation, so I'd have to invite the FBI along, and I would have to invite the Pakistani intelligence service because, after all, it's their country. I figured I would need battering rams, guns, ammunition, walkie-talkies, a satellite dish, encrypted communications, all different sorts of things, which I ordered on my CIA credit card. It arrived just days later in Pakistan. But the idea was we take the battering ram, we break down the door, and we grab everybody inside and then lock them up in whatever local jail happened to be the nearest. And so that's what we started to do. In our first operation, we found 2 Tunisian teenagers, both 18 or 19 years old. They both burst into tears. One asked if he could call his mother. And it was almost disarming. It was shocking that this was the fearsome Al-Qaeda that we were so afraid of. And then we started doing more of these, from 1 a week to 2 a week to 3 a week. Sometimes we would do 2 in a night. And we started capturing more and more important people, members of Egyptian Islamic Jihad, for example, members of Uzbek extremist groups. And so we would just take them to the Rawalpindi jail in the nearby city of Rawalpindi. We got to the point where we actually filled the Rawalpindi jail. There was just no room to squeeze one more Al-Qaeda fighter in it. And so my Pakistani counterpart came to me and said, look, the jail's full. You have to get these guys out. I didn't know what to do with them. So I called CIA headquarters. I said, the Pacs want these Al-Qaeda guys out. What do I do with them? And I was told to put them on a transport plane and send them to Guantanamo. I said, Guantanamo, Cuba? Why would we send them to Cuba? And my colleague in Washington said, well, we've come up with a plan.
The plan was to detain hundreds of people, including U.S. citizens, without formal charges or any trial.
This was a multi-pronged plan to detain prisoners indefinitely, to carry out torture on some of them, which at the time were called enhanced interrogation techniques, and to either render or extraordinarily render others.
Things are changing.
Right, we're going to talk about that in a minute, right? Hey, we're going to talk about it right now. Fuck it. Because this is huge. Now, I've interviewed Mark Fallon. Mark Fallon was a lawyer. He worked at Guantanamo himself. And he was somebody that basically was against the whole idea of basically rendering enhanced interrogation techniques, which is a fancy form of saying torture, right? And didn't think it was effective. And he wrote a whole book on it. It was great. So what happened was that the United States had to find loopholes in the Geneva Convention because these were foreign fighters. And the White House basically worked with the White House legal counsel, people I named before. And what happened was that Cheney saw fit to add the lawyers from the White House with the Department of Justice to come up with legal ramifications for a vast expansion of government power in waging the war on terror. And these lawyers, like John Yoo, Alberto Gonzalez, and David Addington, they drafted legislature in which enemy combatants could not be protected under the Geneva Convention, right? Where torture can be legal to an extent, where the president can suspend writ of habeas corpus. Now, remember, it goes back to that issue about what Addington was talking about. And that was the unitary theory of the executive branch, where the president has, final say even over the, the legislature, the executive, right? Without, compromise or anything like that. And so, this is like huge because even on the evening of September 11th, that the CIA's chief of staff, John Mosman, with the director, George Tenet, they basically had all the names of the hijackers. And then, this was known to them for a while. Now, they didn't have all the names, but it was known, some of them were known to the CIA, but they never told anybody and they kept secret. Now, I have to say that, in the days after 9/11, that it was mainly John Yoo that wrote with the full approval of the Department of Defense and Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, that they were to use the enhanced interrogation techniques under the SEER program by two CIA contractors, Dr. Bruce Jessen and James Mitchell. And what they did was SEER was survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, which means that this was created under the Cold War, where if American soldiers were captured by, say, the Japanese or by the Russians, right, and they were tortured, that they would use the SEER program, to try and survive their captors, either by escape or by resistance or by evasion or whatever, right? But they're not to tell anybody, sensitive data. Well, CIA thought about an idea where they basically said, we're going to reverse it. We want to use the program to get information out of tortured people instead of tortured soldiers where they keep the information. And this had a reverse effect because they told them anything. Of course, it's all fucking obvious, right? That if you're torturing me, I'll tell you whatever you want to fucking hear. So John Yoo with David Addington wanted to authorize the fight against terrorism using the president as, having full-fledged military expansion powers and allowing the CIA and the Department of Defense to capture or kill and question terror suspects with as much latitude as possible, right? Without any laws or walls, right? That's what they wanted to do. And with this, came a lot of pushback. And basically, a lot of people within Bush's own White House, people like Colin Powell, the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, and the Attorney General, John Ashcroft. They were all against this idea of having, enhanced interrogation techniques and using a place like Guantanamo Bay to, capture these individuals and torture them. And this is huge because not many people talk about this anymore. And the issue being raised here is that Guantanamo Bay is part of the United States, even though it's not in the United States. And so because of that, they use that latitude to basically say, all right, we're going to push the ticket and break the law by extracting information using torture, which is not legal, but we're going to rewrite it as enhanced interrogation techniques and give the CIA a lot of latitude, breaking the law. But rendition wasn't created under the Bush White House. It was created under Clinton. And it was the Presidential Directive 39 that was written on June 21st, 1993, that Clinton ensured the United States can and will extract suspects of terrorism against the United States, even if by force. And when 9/11 happened, of course, Bush used this. This is why I don't believe in a left and right narrative. You know what I mean? Because the Democrats create the law or the Republicans create the law, and then the next administration, which is different than the other administration politically, they use the law to their advantage. And so the first country to acknowledge the rendition program was, of all countries, Egypt. And Egypt we're going to be talking about this in a little bit, because Egypt is the epicenter of torture. And and it was one individual which would shape the world over. And during the CIA's under George Tenet's tenure, he suspected that the CIA were relatively successful in over 70 renditions. And it was more than that. Now, presidential directive at the time was still classified. And although local judicial agencies such as the NSA and the CIA, and they partnered together, they helped conduct these operations abroad in the general premise that the secret operations were only known to them and not even to the fucking White House. And U.S. officials, they also took the necessary steps to give the renditions and the torture some legitimacy by implementing regulations under torture. And that was Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Chapter 113C, Section 23040A. And I got it pulled up in front of me, and I'll give you the quote. Whoever outside the United States commits or attempts to commit torture shall be fined under this title or imprisoned no more than 20 years or both. And if death results to any person from conduct prohibited by this subsection, shall be punished by death or imprisonment for any term of years to life. And Tenet took the rendition program and turned it for the more inhumane. And after 9/11, it didn't matter, because we wanted our pound of flesh. And they renditioned hundreds of people. On the record, they claimed 70, but it was hundreds of people. And let's go back to the video itself. And I hope, it's amazing what the United States, my God, after 9/11, it really fucking changed the whole world. And we went from moderately troubled to fucking full out insane, to the point where we're now batshit nuts.
Here in America, too. The 9/11 Commission recommended creating a new super spy called the Director of National Intelligence and placing that person inside the White House. They insisted on expanding the TSA, which now degrades millions of innocent air travelers with full body scans, pat-downs, luggage screenings, and multiple unconstitutional searches every time they enter an airport. The explanation for these changes was that they would keep America safe. But most of the intelligence that was gathered from detainees was obtained through illegal torture, justified by a 2002 DOJ torture memo, which greenlit the use of waterboarding, stress positions, sleep deprivation, and small space confinement for interrogations.
Think of it this way. In 1946, we executed Japanese soldiers who had waterboarded American prisoners of war, right? Waterboarding was a death penalty crime. In January of 1968, the Washington Post ran a front-page photograph of an American soldier waterboarding a North Vietnamese prisoner. On the morning that that picture was published, the Secretary of Defense, Robert S. McNamara, ordered an investigation. The soldier was arrested, he was charged with torture, he was convicted, and sentenced to 20 years at hard labor at Fort Leavenworth.
Under the executive order.
The law never changed, but somehow in 2002, like magic, the George W. Bush administration's attorneys at the Justice Department, the CIA, and the National Security Council decided we didn't have to pay any attention to that.
That's what I just read to you with that quote, right? And they broke the law. They said, fuck this. We need to get the information by any means necessary. That's what they were talking about. And so they did just that. And they said there is no law to be broken because the law doesn't exist anymore regarding people who torture foreign combatants because they went around the Geneva Convention.
Law. And because we were the good guys, we could do anything we wanted. And that's how the torture program came to be.
The CIA set up secret black sites to conduct torture around the world. There were sites in Afghanistan, Poland, Romania, Thailand, and many other countries.
Many of these places were so secret that the presidents and prime ministers of the countries that they were in had no idea that there was a secret CIA prison in their country. These were handshake deals between George Tenet, the director of the CIA, and whoever happened to be director of the intelligence service in those countries. And the reason why there were so many of them was not because we had so many prisoners that we needed multiple locations. It's that word was bound to leak out that these places existed. And so if word leaked out about prison A, well, by then all the prisoners had been moved to prison B.
Most of what we know about the al-Qaeda plans for 9/11 was obtained through torture.
The part of the commission's report that talks about the plot, the actual story of how the hijackers met, how the plan was devised, comes from quote unquote questioning of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Ramzi bin al-Sheikh, who were two detainees that were in custody. It was based on torture. Anyone who knows anything about torture knows that any information gleaned through torture is not reliable, it's not credible.
The CIA knew full well that the
It's like I always said, right? That even if Khalid Sheikh Mohammed told the truth, even if Ramzi bin al-Sheikh told the truth, you still have to have that pause in your head. Like, but they were tortured, right? So in other words, you're in a state of paralysis. You don't know what to believe. And that's exactly where they want you. They don't want you knowing anything. They want you believing anything because you can't go to court with belief. You have to know something. Information is power, right? It's what I've always said.
information it was gathering wasn't credible. Detainees made false confessions under pressure. Those detainees included 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is probably the best example here.
Yep.
He confessed to, for example, murdering Daniel Pearl. Daniel Pearl was a Wall Street Journal reporter who came to Pakistan in early 2002. He was there to meet with a Pakistani extremist with whom he had been emailing for about 6 months. He went on to do the interview, and months later, his head was found in a vacant lot and his torso was found on the other side of town. Well, we know who killed Daniel Pearl. He was arrested. He confessed.
This is Omar Saeed Sheikh, who later on would be found to be a Pakistan ISI operative and a terrorist at the same time, a contract terrorist, but an ISI operative, directed and managed by the ISI. How about that?
He pointed the Pakistani authorities to Daniel Pearl's torso, and he was sentenced to life in prison. But Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, during torture at the hands of CIA officers, also confessed to killing Daniel Pearl.
Right.
We knew he didn't kill Daniel Pearl, but the torture was so severe, he was telling his CIA interviewers, interrogators, anything that he thought they wanted to hear just to get them to stop torturing him.
What was true and what wasn't true? We'll never know the answer to that question. But remarkably, many details of the CIA's torture program are still not publicly acknowledged. They're still secret.
Waterboarding has received the most media attention. It's actually quite simple. You strap a prisoner to a board. His feet and legs are elevated compared to his face. Cloth or burlap or something is put in his mouth to keep him from drowning. And while his head is immobilized, water is poured on his mouth. So of course, water is going to get through the cloth and get down your throat, and it makes you feel like you're drowning. It causes panic. You tense your muscles to the point where it becomes painful. And in the case of one prisoner, Abu Zubaydah, Zain al-Abidin Mohammed Hussein, he actually did drown. His heart stopped beating, and he had to be revived by a CIA doctor performing CPR so that he could be tortured more.
By the way, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was waterboarded 187 times in a single month. 187 fucking times. CNN would later report that he confessed to 83 like different terrorist plots. And when I read that years ago, I said, they didn't torture him for information. They torture him to basically have him claim everything. They were torturing him just to torture. And according to the Senate Select Committee House on Intelligence regarding the investigation of the torture program led by Dianne Feinstein, they found that the CIA was going to torture Khalid Sheikh Mohammed even before he got in the hands of the CIA. So they were going to torture him anyway.
I never thought waterboarding was the worst technique. I thought that there were others that were worse. Now, the easiest technique was called the attention grasp. You grab somebody by the shirt and say, answer my questions. That's not torture. The second one was a slap on the belly called the belly slap. It makes a cracking sound. It's a little bit humiliating. It leaves a handprint. It's probably not torture. The third one was a slap across the face. That's humiliating, but again, reasonable people can agree to disagree about whether it's torture. But then they got progressively worse. The next one was called walling, where you roll a towel and put the towel around the prisoner's neck, and then you slam him repeatedly into a plywood wall. The plywood has a little bit of give, and the towel ensures that the prisoner doesn't get whiplash. But the CIA never used a towel, and the wall was made out of concrete block. And so they did such damage to prisoners that several of them have permanent traumatic brain injury and are unable to participate in their own defenses. The Justice Department never said you could smash somebody's head against a concrete wall until his brain was jelly, but that's exactly what the CIA did. There were others that were even worse. One was called the cold cell, where a prisoner is stripped naked. He's chained to an eye bolt in the ceiling, so he can't get comfortable. He can't sit or kneel or lay. He's standing 24 hours a day. The cell is chilled to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and then every hour, a CIA officer goes into the cell and throws a bucket of ice water on him. Now, we murdered prisoners using that technique. And again, the Justice Department never said, feel free to just murder these people by freezing them to death and giving them hypothermia. That's exactly what the CIA did. There was another one that was actually quite controversial, and that was sleep deprivation.
In the now unclassified legal memo in which Defense Secretary...
By the way, there was a detainee that was killed by that method, the cold method. His name was Gul Rahman. In fact, his body was never recovered by his family. And as you know, I believe that the CIA just basically buried it anonymously somewhere, so they wouldn't know what they did to him. What they did was, according to testimony from individuals that were involved with that case, was that Gul Rahman was chained to the floor outside his cell and was doused with water, and it was like under like 30 degrees or whatever, and he froze to death. That's what happened to him.
Secretary Donald Rumsfeld signed off on counter-resistance techniques at Gitmo in interrogations. Rumsfeld responded to the sleep deprivation technique by saying, I stand at my desk for 8 to 10 hours a day. Why is standing limited for 4 hours?
But the CIA wasn't talking about keeping people awake at their stand-up desks for 24 hours. What they would do to these prisoners is, again, strip them naked, chain them to an eye bolt in the ceiling with industrial strength lights on them 24 hours a day, and death metal blasting at a volume of 11 24 hours a day. They went crazy after a few days of that and then just began to die.
Publicly, the Bush administration pretended none of this was happening. They lied.
This government does not torture people.
I said to my wife, who was also a senior CIA officer, he is a bald-faced liar. He is looking the American people directly in the eye, and he's lying to them.
We've got a new partner. It's a company called Cowboy. This product for a
Their idea of enhanced interrogation techniques. They wrote this up as a memo that was referred to the CIA's covert action staff. The covert action staff approved it and sent it to the CIA General Counsel's office. The General Counsel liked the idea and sent it to the Office of Legal Counsel at the Justice Department. They approved it despite the fact that torture was specifically outlawed from 1945. They approved it and sent it to the National Security Council General Counsel. After his signature, it went to National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice. And after Rice approved it, it went to the president. And as soon as the president signed it, the CIA began torturing its prisoners.
Look how many people were on the same page, right? People from the State Department, people from the National Security Council, people from the Legal Counsel, White House Legal Counsel, people from the Department of Justice Legal Counsel, all the way to the President of the United States. That's how badly they wanted to break the law.
At its peak, Guantanamo Bay held 780 detainees.
Now, I remember at the time thinking, you know, these guys have been in Guantanamo for a long time, and we're not hearing anything about trials or jury selection or federal charges or anything. And a colleague said to me, oh, the vice president nixed that. It was Vice President Dick Cheney who decided or realized or concluded that while at Guantanamo, these men had no rights.
To this day, almost none of them has been charged with a crime. The vast majority of them are innocent.
Upwards of 80 or 85% of the people that we had at Guantanamo were innocent people.
It's much higher than that now. In fact, I think there's maybe 28 people left Guantanamo, including the alleged 5. 2 now can't be tried for 9/11, Amr al-Baluchi and Ramzi bin al-Shib. Al-Shib was deemed mentally unfit, and Amr al-Baluchi, because his information came from torture. That leads Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Tawfiq bin Attash, and Mustafa al-Hassawi left. But their lawyers are basically chomping at the bit, you know, waiting for Judge McCall, who is the Navy judge at Guantanamo, the Guantanamo judge, to make a decision. Now, there was also talks about the White House making a deal, taking the death penalty off the table for them to confess about 9/11. Nothing yet so far.
Who were scooped up in these dragnets. Most of them were Afghan citizens or Pakistani citizens who were involved in disputes with neighbors. Maybe they had loaned money to a neighbor and the neighbor didn't want to pay it back. So he would call the Americans and say, hey, my neighbor is Al-Qaeda. The US Army or the CIA grabs the guy, puts him on a flight to Guantanamo, and nobody ever sees him again.
On December 10th, 2007, John Kiriakou became a whistleblower. He told ABC News about the torture policies.
In an interview with the ABC News, I said that the CIA was torturing its prisoners, that torture was official US government policy, it was not the result of a rogue, and that the policy had been personally approved by the president.
The government responded immediately.
Just to add, Andy Worthington, a British journalist, wrote a great book called The Guantanamo Files that talked about Guantanamo's prison complex and the detainees that are being held there at the time. It was like 836 or something like that. I don't think that's the right number, but it was like 800 something. And it was, you know, it was a really good book. Really good book.
With viciousness and ferocity, they treated Kiriakou much tougher than the Clinton administration had ever treated Osama bin Laden.
He keeps saying Kiriakou. It's John Kiriakou. Good Lord, Tucker Carlson.
Within 24 hours, the CIA filed a document with the FBI called a crimes report, saying that I had disclosed classified information to the media. That's a crime under the Espionage Act. The FBI investigated me from December of 2007 until December of 2008. And in December of 2008, they sent my attorneys something called a declination letter, declining to prosecute me. They said that torture was a crime and that we have a law in the United States that says you cannot classify a crime for the purpose of keeping the information from the American people. And so I was not charged with a crime. 3 weeks later, Barack Obama became president, and he named John Brennan Deputy National Security Advisor for Counterterrorism. John Brennan was one of the godfathers of the CIA's torture program. And he sent a memo to Eric Holder saying, charge him with espionage. Eric Holder wrote back and said, my people don't think he committed espionage. And Brennan wrote back again to Holder saying, charge him anyway and make him defend himself. I had no idea that my phones were tapped, that my emails were being intercepted, or that teams of FBI agents were following me everywhere I went for the next 3 years. And finally, in January of 2012, I was arrested by the FBI and charged with 5 felonies, including 3 counts of espionage, which in many cases is a death penalty charge.
In the end,
By the way, only because he blew the whistle on torture program in a public setting and didn't disclose any classified information. Just like, the former senior executive NSA, Tom Drake. He went to the Baltimore Sun, talked about the violations that the NSA were committing, including waste and fraud. No classified information was shared. But the Bush White House was so reactive, along with the Obama administration, that they basically persecuted these people to break them economically and break them in general.
Kirikou was the only person at CIA to go to prison for anything related to 9/11. His crime? Telling the truth about what the CIA was doing. In fact, despite the CIA's previously unknown role in recruiting the hijackers and their relentless stonewalling to the 9/11 Commission, the CIA was, on net, maybe the biggest winner from 9/11.
In a perverse way, 9/11 is one of the best things that ever happened to the CIA for a number of reasons.
In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, CIA Director Tenet offered a novel approach to taking out the Taliban. Just use the CIA. And it worked. The CIA was the first U.S. agency to deploy to Afghanistan that year. A paramilitary team called Jawbreaker arrived in Afghanistan on September 26, 2001.
The first handful of teams that were sent to Afghanistan were sent there specifically to liaise with the Northern Alliance, to push the Taliban out of power, and to capture or kill every al-Qaeda fighter they could encounter.
Let's talk about that for a sec, because this is one of my favorite subjects. And there's a great book written by the commander of the Jawbreaker team, the chief of the team, Gary Bernstein, but he wasn't the original chief. It was Gary Schroen, who was nearing retirement anyway. Schroen led a team of Uzbeks and other Afghan warlords, including the CIA and the Special Activities Division, along with U.S. Special Forces, Green Berets, to fight against the Taliban and al-Qaeda. He was replaced by Gary Bernstein, who got a lot further than Schroen. And what happened was that they had bin Laden surrounded once. And, I want to play something for you. And I've done this before. I played this video before. And it's a part of the Jawbreaker operation. One of the special forces operators was a legendary officer who went by the name, I think he went by the name Dalton Fury, right? His real name is Thomas Greer. He passed away a couple of years ago. And they had bin Laden surrounded. And this is part of his interview with 60 Minutes. And this is where the State Department had a different objective regarding what the objectives were for the CIA and the bin Laden. Now, I want to just play this part of the video for you and listen to what he has to say, because this is really, really important.
Delta developed an audacious plan to come at bin Laden from the one direction he would never expect.
We want to come in on the back door.
You were going to come up over the tops of the peaks?
That's right. The original plan that we sent up to our higher headquarters, Delta Force wants to come in over the mountain with oxygen, coming from the Pakistan side, over the mountains and come in and get a drop on bin Laden from behind.
Why didn't you do that?
Disapproved at some level above us. Whether that was Central Command or all the way up to the President of the United States, I'm not sure.
The next option Delta wanted to employ was to drop hundreds of landmines in the mountain passes that led to Pakistan, bin Laden's escape route.
First guy blows his leg off, everybody else stops. That allows aircraft overhead to find them. They see all these heat sources out there. Okay, there's a big, large group of Al-Qaeda moving south. They can engage that.
Why didn't you do that?
Disapproved.
Why was it not approved?
I have no idea.
How often does Delta come up with a tactical plan that's disapproved by higher headquarters?
In my experience, in my 5 years at Delta, never before.
Okay, so what does that tell you, right? The orders came from SOCOM General Tommy Franks, and he's getting his orders from who? The President of the United States, George Bush. And what war was coming afterwards? Iraq. Now, according to Gary Bernstein in his book, now remember, he's chief of the Jawbreaker operation. He says in the book that he thinks that bin Laden alive would keep the idea that Iraq could be blamed for 9/11 as long as bin Laden's alive, and that the U.S. forces can be rerouted from Afghanistan to Iraq. And that's exactly what happened. Bin Laden lives for another 10 years. We go to war with Iraq. And that's it. You know, history, rewrite history written itself. So that was the Jawbreaker operation. And I just wanted to, you know, fill you in on that.
That extended then to Pakistan by the end of the year 2001.
The context here is important. After the end of the Cold War, it wasn't exactly clear what the CIA would do. They'd spent 40 years fighting the Soviets. What next?
In the mid-90s, President Bill Clinton, who was really no fan of the CIA, cut the CIA's budget. And that was the first time that the CIA had had a budget cut since the Carter administration in the late 1970s. On the day after 9/11, the CIA got
Billions.
a budget supplement of 10 figures. The amount is still classified, but I actually went up to the counterterrorism center chief, Kofor Black at the time. This was about 5-6 days after 9/11, and I said, Kofor, I have an idea for an operation that I want to put past you. And he put up his hands and he said, whatever it is, just do it. I have so much money, I can't possibly spend it all. So we all began flying business class all over the world. There are famous stories of CIA officers throwing sacks of money out of the side of helicopters, which gave rise to a joke at the agency that you can't buy an Afghan warlord, but you can certainly rent one.
This is what happened during Jawbreaker. We would give money to Afghan warlords like Abdul Rashid Dassam. And others to fight against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. But Afghan warlords were notable about their allegiances under the persuasion of money. Bin Laden had money too. The Taliban also had money. And so they would win over the allegiance of the Afghans. And this is the reason why you couldn't really rely on the Afghans in their war at Tora Bora, which was the Battle of Tora Bora, which is Jawbreaker operation. And they really just, you know, were finicky about that. Couldn't trust them.
And that's what we were doing.
The CIA provided millions of dollars in direct cash payment to anti-Taliban groups, along with weapons and communications support. By November 2001, It was the CIA's Special Activities Division, not the U.S. military, that had taken Kabul and the fortress called Mazar-e-Sharif. The CIA targeted bin Laden as early as December 2001, but as was so often the case during the tenure of George Tenet, the CIA failed to capture bin Laden. Tenet became CIA director in 1997, just as bin Laden was issuing his first fatwa against the United States. A leader with integrity would have resigned in shame after missing obvious warnings about a major attack. But Tenet had no shame. The additional resources and powers the CIA received did not lead to better outcomes. On March 20th, 2003, the U.S. invaded Iraq. It did so based on false intelligence that came from, yes, the CIA run by George Tenet.
Now, let's talk about that, because it talks about how the Iraq War started. The Iraq was started from the torture of a detainee named Ibn Sheikh al-Libi, who was a former trainer at a camp called Kaldeen. This camp was not an al-Qaeda camp. Abu Zubaydah was also a trainer there. And, this article by Middle East Eye back in 2018, Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi, the most important torture story never told. The Libyan, whose false intelligence extracted under torture was used to make the case for war in Iraq. It was an embarrassment to powerful people, and Gaddafi was willing to make him disappear. Now, this is Ibn Sheikh al-Libi. There's a picture of him here. And I want to read this part of the article to you. Unsurprisingly, Libby said what the United States wanted to hear. Now he was captured in Egypt. The CIA found out, said, get him from, because the CIA didn't have the authority yet, still in the works, about torture, so they couldn't participate. So they asked the Egyptians to do it. That Saddam Hussein was in league with Al-Qaeda. Later, I was able to report evidence declassified from Guantanamo, where a detainee being tortured there also said that Saddam's people were developing weapons of mass destruction. When Libby first all said this, some CIA operatives expressed doubt, but did not stop U.S. President Bush relying on it in his speech in October 2002, or Secretary Colin Powell delivering his infamous presentation to the UN Security Council in February of 2003. And when the CIA, when the war started, government officials went to al-Libi later on in Egypt and said, why did you lie? We found out why'd you make stuff up? Incredulously, they asked him that. And he said, I told you wherever you wanted to hear to get torture to stop. So the entire Iraq war was based on a lie of one man. Well, shortly thereafter, Ibn Sheikh al-Libi was found hanged in his cell. Suicide, they said. So he got Epsteined long before Epsteined himself.
The United States knows that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction.
It was all lies. But in Washington, failure is seen as success and rewarded. By 2015, the CIA's public budget had risen to $15 billion, 500% higher than it was in the mid-1990s when they were fighting for post-Cold War relevance. And by the way, that's simply the public budget. Much of CIA's funding remains classified. The FBI was also rewarded for failing to protect America. By 2023, the FBI's budget was almost $11 billion. That's up from $3.3 billion the year of the 9/11 attacks. But none of it made America safer.
Before 9/11, Silicon Valley had the highest concentration of millionaires anywhere in America. But post 9/11, Washington, D.C. has the highest concentration of millionaires anywhere in America. And it's because Congress put so many billions upon billions of dollars in counterterrorism and in intelligence, including in literally thousands of federal contractors called Beltway bandits, that everybody got rich.
After the attacks, the FBI radically shifted agent resources to its top priorities. Those were counterterrorism and counterintelligence and cybercrime. Traditional crime fighting took a back seat. The FBI's drug program has sustained by far the largest reduction in FBI agent workforce. about 550 positions, or more than 80% of the non-supervisory field agents who were permanently reprogrammed. Not surprisingly, this reduction in drug fighting aligned with the deadliest drug epidemic in American history. More than 1 million Americans died.
I am not only not a conspiracy theorist, I'm about as far away from being a conspiracy theorist as a person can be. But I'm also a realist, and I made the first half of my career at the CIA as an analyst. And to come to an analytic judgment, you have to look at the evidence. Well, the evidence surrounding 9/11 says that there is a far greater story there than we have been led to believe.
Many of the people involved in this story should be in prison today, but of course they're not. That's the real story of 9/11. It's the story of winners and losers. On the day of the attacks, the losers were the 2,977 civilians who were murdered. It was the children who found out their parents weren't coming home. The New Yorkers who witnessed the smoke rising from their city. It was the firemen and cops who rushed into the towers to save those trapped inside and died. In the aftermath of the attack, the losers were the nearly 7,000 U.S. service members who were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the 52,000 who were wounded in action there. The losers are the American people, the rest of us, who lived in a country permanently transformed, stripped of its fundamental constitutional rights. We're $7 trillion poor with nothing to show for it. Abroad, the losers were even more numerous. Nearly 5 million people were killed in the post-9/11 wars, most of them civilian. Entire countries were destroyed. The world was destabilized. And then there were the winners. In the immediate aftermath of the attacks, President George W. Bush enjoyed the highest approval ratings in the history of modern politics. He leveraged that popularity to launch a decade of regime change wars. In 2002, he defied the odds in the midterm elections and expanded his party's majority in the Congress. In 2004, he became the first Republican presidential candidate in decades to win re-election with a majority of the popular vote. When Bush arrived in office in 2000, he was worth about $20 million. Today, some estimates say he's worth more than $50 million. Bush lives in Texas today. He spends most of his time painting and riding his bike. National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, who spent most of 2001 ignoring the steady stream of very clear warnings about an imminent terror attack, got a promotion. In 2005, she became the Secretary of State. She received the overwhelming support from the United States Senate. Since then, Rice has enriched herself by serving on numerous corporate boards and is director of the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, where she is a professor. Disgraced CIA Director George Tenet, meanwhile, retired from the CIA in 2004, about a year after he provoked the invasion of Iraq. He got a sinecure as a professor at Georgetown University, not surprisingly. He authored multiple books, and, as so many in the CIA do, he joined the board of directors of multiple defense contractors. Tenet also spent more than a decade at an investment bank. After leaving the CIA, he was awarded a Presidential Medal of Freedom by George W. Bush. That's the nation's highest civilian honor. John Brennan, the Saudi station chief who helped the hijackers get their passports, blocked Alex Station from getting basic biographical details about Osama bin Laden, and personally worked to ensure that John Kiriakou ended up going to prison for telling the truth about what the CIA was doing, ended up running the CIA itself. He was appointed by Barack Obama to be director. While running the CIA, Brennan was caught hacking the computers of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Brennan lied about that and never faced consequences for that lie. After leaving the CIA, he played a central role in the Russiagate hoax that dominated Donald Trump's first term. He obtained a sinecure at the University of Texas and became an MSNBC contributor. Cofer Black, who ran the Counterterrorism Center, left the public sector for a successful career as a defense contractor. In 2017, maybe inevitably, he joined Hunter Biden on the board of Burisma, the Ukrainian gas company. Paul Wolfowitz, the Pentagon official who began calling for an invasion of Iraq just hours after the 9/11 attacks, ended up getting the war he wanted. He also got a promotion. In 2005, Paul Wolfowitz became the president of the World Bank. He resigned 2 years later during a corruption scandal. In 2016, Paul Wolfowitz endorsed Hillary Clinton. And finally, there's Philip Zelikow, the man behind the Dishonest Commission report. After finishing his time as executive director of the commission, Zelikow got what he always wanted: more power. His good friend, Condoleezza Rice, rewarded him for the work he did on the commission. Zelikow became counselor of the State Department, where he acted as Rice's deputy. He has since served on too many boards to mention. He's also served as an advisor to the Obama administration and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Zelikow is
professor at the university.
And that's all you need to know. right? Because it ends right there. And, I want to talk about one last thing regarding uh, the first person that was captured by the U.S. government or the CIA for that regarding the 9/11 attacks. And it was Abu Zubaydah, an alleged Al Qaeda ranking number 3 guy by the State Department and the CIA. Well, when they captured him, the FBI were in charge of asking him questions. And then, this, by the way, this was John Kiriako's operation. And they got him. He was shot. Then he was taken to a hospital where he was being interviewed by the FBI. The CIA found out, Bush intervened, and he was renditioned to the CIA and he was tortured. Well, years later, under the tribunal hearing for Abu Zubaydah, it came out that, oh, we were wrong about him. Now, this is an article by the Washington Post. This is 2009, and the headline is the following. CIA says a misjudged role of high-value detainee Abu Zubaydah transcript showed. I have the transcript of this. And look what this says. This is 2009. An al-Qaeda associate captured by the CIA and subjected to harsh interrogation techniques said his jailers later told him they had mistakenly thought he was the number 3 man in al-Qaeda and a partner of bin Laden, according to a newly released excerpt from a 2007 hearing. They told me, sorry, we discovered that you are not number 3, not a partner, not even a fighter, said Abu Zubaydah, speaking in broken English, according to a new transcript of the Combatant Status Review Tribunal held at the U.S. military prison in Guantanamo, Cuba. But that wasn't enough, because Abu Zubaydah is considered one of only 3 people at Guantanamo to be a forever detainee, stating that he's too dangerous to be let go. He's currently held without charge and held indefinitely at Guantanamo, meaning he can never leave. Now, the reason why is not because he's dangerous. It's because of what he could tell the world and the torture methods that was used and the information that was extracted from him. And this could be said of any detainee there. Now, like I said, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed could basically be telling the truth. He could be the mastermind behind 9/11. I think he is. He could be the ones who picked out the hijackers, most of them, anyway, the muscle ones. I think he did. But does that mean that the entire 9/11 story told by the officials of the government is the exact truth? No, it doesn't work like that. Most of it is true. Some of it is false. Some of it are half-truths. But you have to do your due diligence and find out what those are, and it takes time. Now, I want to end it like this. This was a very good series by Tucker Carlson. They talked at some level about the one document that's never talked about by anyone, even self-professed experts in 9/11, the Gerald Shea Memorandum. It also spoke at some level about the Donald Canestraro document. It talked about a lot of different theories, but most of them were sound and rational. Now, he made a few mistakes here and there, but overall, this was an actual good 5-part series. And I have no harsh critique of Tucker Carlson in this series. So I would say that it was worth watching all 5 parts, but there is a lot that is left out. And that is where people like DJ Thermodetonator and myself are still trying to share with the world about what those missing pieces are. You're not going to get it from the Truth Movement. You're not going to get it from Richard Gage. You're not going to get it from architects and engineers. You're not going to get the whole story. We're far more expansive than that. And that's where the answers lie. Remember, they're the ones without the names. At least we have some names to go along with some crimes and malfeasance, and maybe even foreknowledge. They still haven't gotten anything in court, and you'll never see them in court ever. Not them, not the International Center for Justice under Ted Walter, not Barbara Honegger, not Greg McKee, not Jason Burmis or Alex Jones or Jim Fetzer or any of these people. Not Rebecca Roth, not Christopher Bolin, nobody. None of those people will ever, ever go to court or try to go to court to provide their case because they don't got a case. They got a bunch of fractured, misplaced theories, some of it irrational, and could never be accounted for in a court of law. Now, of course, I'm not in court, but there are far more reasonable people that are in court that know more than me and have more resources. Court, law firms like Motley Rice, Kreindler and Kreindler, who talk about similar issues like I do, and they're getting somewhere in the Southern District of New York. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to thank you very much for tuning in, and have a good weekend, everybody. See you in the next video.